My ex told me no one will ever love you like I did, so I proved her right by never needing her again. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and a few years ago, I thought I'd found the woman I'd spend my life with. Back then, I wasn't exactly confident. I grew up in a house where affection had to be earned, where silence was punishment and love was a reward. So when someone finally made me feel seen, I clung to it like it was oxygen, that someone was Alyssa. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met, confident, passionate, magnetic. The kind of woman who could walk into a room and pull every pair of eyes toward her without even trying. When she chose me, it felt like I'd been handed proof that maybe I was worth something after all. We met through a mutual friend at a small birthday dinner. She was loud, funny, and brutally honest in a way that caught me off guard. I remember thinking, she's out of my league. But by the end of the night, we were sitting on the balcony talking about everything. Childhood dreams, our favorite books, the kind of love we both wanted. She said, "When I fall hard." I didn't know then how literal that would become. The first few months were intoxicating. She'd surprise me at work with coffee, leave handwritten notes in my car, and plan spontaneous weekend getaways. I'd never experienced love that intense. It was like living in color after years of grayscale. Every message from her made my heart race. Every kiss felt like a promise. But then little things started to shift. A joke about how I talked too softly, a complaint about the way I dressed or how I didn't speak up enough. At first, I laughed it off. I thought, she just wants me to be my best self. Looking back now, I realized those were the first cracks forming, the kind that start small, invisible, until the whole thing collapses. At first, I told myself every couple goes through phases, that love isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's just quiet maintenance. But Alyssa's version of maintenance felt more like erosion. Slowly, bit by bit, she started wearing me down without even raising her voice. It began with comments disguised as advice. "You should be more ambitious," she'd say while scrolling through her phone. "You're so talented, but you don't push yourself." On good days, it sounded encouraging. On bad days, it felt like I was constantly failing a test I didn't know I was taking. Then came the comparisons. Her ex, who used to surprise her with expensive gifts, or her boss who wasn't afraid to speak his mind. I'd sit there trying not to flinch, pretending I wasn't shrinking under the weight of her words. One night, while we were out with friends, she laughed at a story I told, not because it was funny, but because she said I sounded nervous. I remember the sting in my chest as everyone else chuckled awkwardly. Later, when I told her it hurt, she sighed and said, "You're too sensitive." I was just joking. I tried to fix things by being better, working longer hours, planning thoughtful dates, listening to her rants without interrupting. I wanted her approval so badly it became my full-time job. Every small smile felt like a paycheck. Every silent treatment felt like a pink slip. One night, after she accused me of not trying hard enough, I broke down. "What do you want from me, Alyssa?" I asked. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "I just want you to be the man I know you could be." It sounded loving. It sounded hopeful. But what I didn't realize then was that she didn't love me. She loved the version she could control. Alyssa's control didn't come all at once. It crept in quietly, like fog. At first, she'd suggest things. Maybe I shouldn't hang out with certain friends who didn't share our goals. Or maybe I should skip that weekend trip with my coworkers because couples shouldn't need space. She'd say it with a smile, a tilt of her head, and I'd agree, thinking she just cared. But soon, those suggestions turned into expectations. When I told her my best friend from college invited me out for a drink, she frowned. "You'd rather spend time with him than me?" she asked softly, but the silence after that question felt suffocating. I stayed home that night. Then the next, and the one after that, my world started shrinking. Friends stopped calling. I stopped answering. Even my family noticed. My mom once said over the phone, "You don't sound like yourself lately," and I laughed it off, saying I was just tired. But deep down, I knew she was right. I wasn't myself. I was whoever Alyssa needed me to be that day. She started mocking the little things I enjoyed. My music taste? Too depressing. My love for photography? A waste of time. When I once mentioned wanting to take a solo weekend to clear my head, she snapped, "If you need time away, maybe you don't love me enough." I remember one evening vividly. I had planned a surprise date night for her, her favorite restaurant, the one by the lake. But an hour before, she texted, "Can't make it. Work dinner. Don't wait up." I sat there alone at the table, the candle burning between two empty wine glasses. The waiter asked gently, "Should I bring the check?" And I just nodded. That was the night I realized I was no longer her partner. I was her project. And I was failing miserably. The night everything collapsed started like any other argument, small, stupid, and forgettable. I'd forgotten to text her after work, and by the time I got home, she was pacing the living room, phone in hand, eyes sharp. "Do you even care about this relationship anymore?" she demanded. I tried to stay calm. "Alyssa, I was just driving home. I didn't think—" She cut me off. "Exactly. You never think. You're selfish, you're lazy, you don't even try to make me happy." Her words hit harder than I expected. I stood there frozen, watching the woman I'd once thought was my soulmate tear me apart piece by piece. I wanted to argue back, but part of me still believed she was right. That maybe I wasn't enough. That maybe I really did deserve this. Then, in the middle of her rant, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and something changed in her expression. Guilt, panic, something. I asked quietly, "Who's that?" She hesitated just long enough to tell me everything I needed to know. "Don't," she said, voice trembling now. "You'll just make this harder." "What will make it harder, Alyssa?" I asked, my stomach sinking. She looked up at me, and I swear I'll never forget her face when she said, "I've been seeing someone else. I didn't mean for it to happen, but he makes me feel alive again. It felt like the air was punched out of me. My chest tightened, my ears rang, and I couldn't speak. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every ounce of myself I'd given her, it all collapsed in an instant. And then she said the line that would echo in my head for years. "No one will ever love you like I did." She walked out before I could say a word. I just stood there staring at the door, realizing that maybe she was right, because at that moment, I didn't even love myself. The silence after she left was deafening. It wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like the air itself was pressing down on me. For days, I wandered around my apartment in a fog, replaying her words over and over in my head. "No one will ever love you like I did." It became a curse that followed me everywhere. I stopped eating, stopped showering, stopped answering texts. My phone would light up with messages from friends, "You okay, man?" But I couldn't face anyone. I didn't know how to explain that I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out the person I used to be. Sometimes I'd scroll through old photos of us, torturing myself with the smiles I used to think were real. I'd read old messages where she called me her forever, and for a second I'd almost believe it again. But then the nausea would hit, the realization that the woman in those texts was never really who I thought she was. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of her laughter in my head. I kept waiting for her to call, to say it was all a mistake. But she didn't. She moved on while I stayed frozen in the wreckage. One day, my best friend Mark showed up unannounced. He took one look at me and said, "Dude, you need help." I wanted to argue, but the truth was written all over the apartment. Empty takeout boxes, unopened mail, the smell of stale air. A week later, I found myself sitting across from a therapist, arms crossed, pretending I didn't need to be there. I told her everything, the love, the control, the betrayal. When I finished, she just looked at me and asked, "What if her voice isn't the truth?" That question haunted me, because for the first time I wondered, what if Alyssa wasn't my definition of love? What if she was the reason I didn't know what love actually was? Healing didn't start with some grand realization. It began with small, painful steps that felt meaningless at first. Making my bed, opening the blinds, forcing myself to eat breakfast. I remember the first morning I took a walk outside after weeks of hiding. The sun felt too bright, the world too loud. But for the first time in months, I wasn't just existing inside the memory of her. I was breathing. Therapy became my anchor. Every session peeled back layers I didn't even know were there. We talked about my childhood, how I'd learned to equate love with pleasing people, how I mistook control for care. I started to see how Alyssa had fit perfectly into the mold I'd built for my own suffering. It wasn't easy. Some days I'd wake up feeling strong, ready to move forward. Others I'd spiral back into old memories, missing the chaos because it was familiar. My therapist would remind me, progress isn't linear, it's cyclical. You're not going backward, you're revisiting what you're healing from. I began spending more time with Mark and my sister, people who loved me without conditions. I went back to the gym not to impress anyone, just to feel something real again. I dusted off my old camera and started taking photos of sunsets, city lights, quiet moments. There was one evening I'll never forget. I came across an old photo of Alyssa and me, smiling, arms around each other. My first instinct was to delete it, but instead I stared at it for a long time. Then I whispered, "You don't control me anymore." And I deleted it, not out of anger, but peace. That night I realized healing doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like silence, and finally being okay with it. It had been almost 6 months since I'd last seen or heard from Alyssa. By then I'd built a fragile sense of peace. I wasn't healed completely, but the pain had dulled enough that I could breathe without feeling like my chest might cave in. I was finally learning how to exist without needing her validation. Then one night, my phone lit up with a name I never thought I'd see again, Alyssa. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. The message was short. "Hey, I've been thinking about you. Can we talk?" My first instinct was to ignore it. But curiosity, or maybe the ghost of my old self, got the better of me. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. When she walked into the cafe, it was like stepping back in time. She looked almost the same, confident, radiant, but there was something different in her eyes. A flicker of uncertainty. She smiled that familiar, disarming smile and said softly, "You look good." I managed a polite nod. "So do you. We talked for a while." Or rather, she talked. About her new job, how things didn't work out with the guy she'd left me for, and how she'd been doing a lot of self-reflection. Then came the line I saw coming a mile away. I realize now what we had was special. "I miss you." There it was. The same trap, wrapped in nostalgia. But this time, it didn't pull me under. I listened, calm and detached, watching the woman who once had power over every thought in my head try to rebuild a bridge she'd burned herself. When she reached across the table and touched my hand, saying, "I still love you," I didn't feel the rush of old feelings. I just felt tired. That's when I knew. The version of me she destroyed wasn't coming back. For the next few weeks, Alyssa started slipping back into my life like nothing had happened. She'd text me random things, songs we used to love, old photos, inside jokes. At first, I kept my replies short, neutral, but then she'd say things like, "I can't sleep without hearing your voice," or, "You were the only one who really understood me." Part of me wanted to believe her. The same part that still remembered the way she'd hold me when things were good. It's a dangerous kind of nostalgia, the kind that makes you forget the pain long enough to miss the poison. One Friday night, she called while I was cooking dinner. "Can we have dinner tomorrow?" she asked softly. "Just to talk. No pressure." Against my better judgment, I said yes. When I arrived, she'd gone all out. Candlelight, wine, her favorite playlist humming softly in the background. It felt like the ghost of our relationship was alive again. She laughed easily, touched my arm when she spoke, and kept saying things like, "You've really changed. I miss this version of you." At one point, she leaned closer, whispering, "We could try again, you know. We're both different now." For a moment, I almost gave in. The smell of her perfume, the warmth in her eyes. It all pulled at the weakest parts of me. But then something inside me snapped into focus. I remembered the nights I spent broken, the words she'd thrown like knives, the way she'd looked at me when she said, "No one will ever love you like I did." I set my glass down, looked her straight in the eye and said quietly, "You're right, no one will. And that's exactly why I can't do this." Then I stood up and walked out. She didn't follow, but as I closed the door behind me, I felt something new. Not sadness, not anger. Freedom. For a few days after that dinner, I felt invincible, like I'd finally closed the chapter that had haunted me for so long. But healing, I've learned, isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. You circle back to old wounds until they stop bleeding, and mine hadn't fully closed yet. The silence that followed walking away from Alyssa hit harder than I expected. I thought it would feel empowering. Instead, it felt empty. I'd spent years defining myself through her, through the chaos, the love, the pain, and now there was just quiet. No calls, no texts, no highs or lows. just me and the echo of everything I used to be. One night, I came home after work, sat on the floor of my apartment, and stared at nothing. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. I picked up my phone and hovered over her contact. Still memorized, still there. For a moment, my thumb almost pressed call. I wanted to hear her voice even if it hurt, but I didn't. Instead, I put the phone down and let the silence swallow me whole. I cried, not for her, but for the version of myself that had begged to be loved by someone who only wanted to own me. Mark came by the next day. He looked around at the dim light, the half-eaten food, the exhaustion written all over me. "You can't keep living like this, man," he said. "She's gone. You survived. Start acting like it." That night, his words echoed in my head. You survived. I hadn't thought of it that way before. Because surviving meant something bigger. It meant I'd already done the hardest part. And if I could survive her, maybe I could finally learn to live without her too. Something shifted after that night. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden burst of motivation or cinematic sunrise. It was subtle, steady, like waking up from a long sleep. I started showing up for myself in small ways again, cooking real meals, opening the curtains, taking walks without needing a destination. For the first time in years, I wasn't living to prove anything to anyone. Therapy became less about pain and more about rediscovery. My therapist asked, "Who were you before her?" I didn't have an answer then, but I wanted to find out. So I started exploring. I picked up my old camera, joined a photography class, even signed up for a local charity run. Every new experience felt awkward at first, like trying on clothes that didn't quite fit yet, but little by little. I started recognizing the person staring back in the mirror. I reconnected with friends I'd ghosted during my relationship. One of them, Sarah, hugged me and said, "You look lighter." I smiled because it was true. I was lighter. The guilt, the shame, the need for her approval, it was fading. Work started to feel fulfilling again. I was promoted to lead a small project. Nothing huge, but it felt like a quiet victory. I wasn't doing it to impress Alyssa or anyone else. I was doing it because I finally believed I could. One night, while journaling, I found myself writing, "Maybe she was right. No one will ever love me like she did." But this time, I added something new beneath it. And thank God for that, because her love broke me, but losing it rebuilt me. And for the first time in my life, I realized the love I needed most wasn't hers. It was mine. It was almost a year later when our paths crossed again. I wasn't expecting it. I was at a friend's engagement party laughing over something stupid Mark said when I heard a voice behind me say my name. I turned and there she was, Alyssa. She looked almost exactly the same, but something in her energy was off. The confidence that used to radiate from her had dimmed a little, like the light had gone out just beneath the surface. She smiled a bit too tightly and said, "Wow, you look great." "Thanks," I said calmly, genuinely. "It's been a while," she laughed softly. "Yeah, a lifetime it feels like." We made small talk, safe topics, the kind you use when both people are pretending the past doesn't hang between them like smoke. She mentioned she'd been single for a while, that she was focusing on herself. I nodded, listening, but I felt nothing. No anger, no nostalgia, no ache. Just peace. At one point, she glanced at my glass and said, "You still drink that whiskey you love?" I smiled. "Sometimes." There was a long pause before she said quietly, "I messed up, didn't I?" I didn't gloat. I didn't remind her of what she did, or how deep she'd cut me. I just said, "We both did what we needed to become who we are now." She looked at me like she didn't understand. Maybe she didn't. Because the man standing in front of her wasn't the same one she broke. When the party ended, I told her it was nice seeing her, and as I walked away, I caught her reflection in a window, standing alone, staring after me. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Because walking away didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like closure. That night when I got home, I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened. The love, the chaos, the heartbreak, and the silence that followed. For so long, I thought Alyssa had ruined me. But now looking back, I realized she had unintentionally done something else. She'd forced me to rebuild myself from the ground up, and this time I was building on my own foundation, not hers. In therapy, I once asked my counselor, How do you know when you're truly healed? She smiled and said, when the story stops hurting and starts teaching. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Seeing Alyssa again didn't stir up anger or longing. It gave me perspective. I didn't need revenge or validation. I didn't need her to regret losing me. The real victory was how little power she had over me anymore. I think back to the person I was when she left. Broken, desperate, clinging to the idea that love had to hurt to be real. And I wish I could tell that version of me what I know now. That sometimes, the person you think you need to survive is the very thing holding you back from living. Now, my mornings are quiet. I wake up, make coffee, open the blinds, and let the sunlight fill my apartment. There's no one here but me, and that doesn't scare me anymore. It feels peaceful, Alyssa once said. No one will ever love you like I did. And she was right. No one will, because what she called love was control, and what I've found since is freedom. And in a way, I guess I did prove her right, by never needing her again.